There's a single character within Brandon Sanderson's high fantasy epic, The Stormlight Archive, that he uses to redefine the fantasy genre. It's not Kaladin Stormblessed, it's not Dalinar, Shallan, or even Adolin. It's Toril Sadeas. Sadeas, the Alethi High Prince and a primary antagonist within the series. But what makes Sadeas even more remarkable is that his arc is Sanderson's rejection of the storytelling found in a series like A Song of Ice and Fire or The First Law. See, Sadeas is a thread, a piece of connective tissue to other huge fantasy series like A Song of Ice and Fire. Sadeas could fit just as well playing politics in the throne room of the Red Keep as he does battling listeners on the Shattered Plains. In fact, Sadeas is a perfect example of how two authors can differ in their storytelling techniques. See, Brandon Sanderson writes for one reason. He explains this in his 2023 essay, Outside.
I don't write for plot twists or dragons or clever turns of phrase, though I enjoy all of these. I write because stories bring people inside, and I sincerely, genuinely believe that is what the world needs.
He writes to get people to feel the emotions of his characters. And by following Toril Sadeas' character arc, you can see how Sanderson uses him to better bring the reader inside. This video contains spoilers for A Song of Ice and Fire and the Stormlight Archive up to Rhythm of War. There are no spoilers for Wind and Truth. This video will compare and contrast Sanderson's Stormlight Archive and George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire series using Toril Sadeas. We will look at how Sanderson and Martin use history to inform politics, how selfish characters work in each series, and how Sanderson uses Sadeas to enhance his own storytelling strengths. Let's look at Sadeas in Book 1 of the Stormlight Archive, The Way of Kings. Sadeas.
Everything is a contest, Sadeas said with a wave of his hand. All dealings among men are a contest in which some will succeed and others fail. And some are failing quite spectacularly.
The Way of Kings is heavy on politics. The Dalinar sections are propelled by a single phrase, unite them. This need to unite puts Dalinar squarely into the political game, facing him against Sadeas, who views Dalinar as past his prime and possibly going mad.
Dalinar, once in a while it appears that senile old brain of yours can come up with a good idea or two.
This political maneuvering is something King Elhokar explicitly wants in his High Princes. Throughout Way of Kings, we see Sadeas try to goad Dalinar into being the man he once was. And not because Sadeas is a two-dimensional villain, no. He's the very epitome of an Alethi High Prince. He represents the old way of doing things in Alethi society, the might makes right mentality. It's less about Dalinar failing and more about seeing Alethkar's power maintained and expanded. Sadeas views Dalinar's change as a threat to that power because if Dalinar weakens, Sadeas believes Alethkar will fall. And guess what? He was right, but for the wrong reasons. Alethkar did fall to the enemy, and its capital city Kholinar plundered and captured by the end of Book 3. Sadeas is working for the good of Alethkar in Book 1. In Way of Kings, Sadeas feels like you could lift him up and set him in King's Landing and he would thrive. So, why does Sadeas feel this way? Well, it's the same reason why all that verbal sparring with Dalinar is so awesome. History and politics. Much like all the characters in A Game of Thrones, Sadeas is woven into the very fabric of the story. Sadeas has a rich history with Dalinar, the Kholin family, and Kaladin, because don't forget, Sadeas is High Prince to the lands Kaladin's family lives on. And when you turn to look at another great fantasy series, A Song of Ice and Fire, you'll also find nearly every character is connected and has history with other characters. Both Sanderson and Martin have created hundreds and hundreds of years of history for their worlds, but they utilize them differently. Everything happening now in The Song of Ice and Fire is a direct result of events that happened 20 years prior during Robert's Rebellion. These events including Rhaegar handing Lyanna a blue rose at the tourney of Harrenhal, the Mad King burning Ned Stark's father with wildfire, Jaime Lannister becoming the Kingslayer, the Battle of the Bells, the Ruby Fort, Ned's promise to his sister Lyanna. Every single one of these events has a lasting effect on the story because they affect the characters that live through them and in turn affect their children. Now let's look at Sanderson's recent history in Stormlight, Beyond the Recreants, the Hierocracy, and the Sunmaker's Reign. This includes the Alethi unification through Galavar's conquest, the burning of the Rift, the listener's exploration to uncharted territory, and Gavilar's assassination. These are huge historical events that affect Roshar even now. But there's a big piece missing. Many of the characters involved in this recent history have either bent the knee or died. These deaths have forged a path for Stormlight to become a less political series. But how does death veer us away from complex political storytelling in the Stormlight Archive when The Song of Ice and Fire has dozens of character deaths? How is this possible? The destruction of the past leads to the destruction of politics. Think about the characters involved in the recent history of Roshar. Sadeas, Gavilar, Evie, Roshon, Roion, Ruthar, Sabariel, both Bright Lords Tanalan of the Rift, the Listeners, the High Princes of Yakaved. What do they all have in common? They all die or become loyal to the cause, which means they don't create any more issues in the main plot. Let's look at the political plots in Way of Kings real quick. One of the primary plot lines in that book is King Elhokar cutting his own saddle girdle, stirring up political infighting between his high princes. There's Sadeas undermining Dalinar at every step, from lying about amassing gem hearts to abandoning the Battle of the Tower. There's Kaladin working Gaz and the men of the bridge crew to become their leader. Way of Kings is a methodical and political book. Now, let's look at Rhythm of War. By Book 4, we see Dalinar in charge of the United Coalition of Nations and Radiance, leading them to battle. We get a whiff of politics throughout Book 4, but nothing like Way of Kings. Most instances of possible political intrigue are wrapped up neatly. For example, Navani and Sabariel haggle briefly over the High Prince taking control of the camps on the Shattered Plains. They settle on letting Sabariel skim a negligible amount of money within the war camps, and he's put away for the rest of the book. Dalinar thinks this of the other High Princes later in the book.
They were becoming a useful lot. Aladar kept reinforcing Dalinar's trust in him, and Dalinar had sent him to oversee the withdrawal in Alethkar. Hatham had fallen into line, and Bethab was proving quite useful as an ambassador stationed in Thaylen City. Roion was dead with honors, his son carefully chosen to not make things difficult. Even Sabariel was relevant these days.
Moments after this thought, the only problematic High Prince remaining, High Prince Ruthar, is dueled by Queen Yasna, stabbed in the throat and healed by Renarin.
As you have died tonight, and I have bested you legally in combat, I name you forfeit of your title. It will pass to your eldest son, who has been speaking quite frankly with wit recently. It seems he will make a far more fitting High Prince.
In other words, the characters with the history are removed. As the Stormlight Archive goes on, Sanderson tightens his story, removing the parts of storytelling that can give him problems, like characters with history that could cause political plot complications down the line. Sanderson does this to focus the story on what he can do better than politics, his trademark internal character work and breakneck action. But how does Sanderson know which characters to kill or write off? Where did the destruction of politics begin? Well, it was our old friend Sadeas. Selfish characters versus characters with higher purpose. In a Sanderson story, characters must serve a higher purpose to stay relevant to the story. And when a character makes a selfish choice, they become expendable. Sadeas mentioned several times throughout Way of Kings that he was working for the good of Alethkar. And then in Chapter 5 of Words of Radiance, he has a change of heart.
By destroying him, I sought to prevent the collapse of the kingdom. Now I'm wondering if that collapse wouldn't be better for us all.
Later, Sadeas says this to his wife Iole.
I will conquer this kingdom anew, and then Yakaved will follow. After all, the purpose of this life is to train soldiers. In a way, I'm only doing what God himself wants.
Here, at this moment, when Sadeas throws away the ideal of working for something larger and takes up the ideal to work for himself and strive for conquest, Sadeas seals his fate. At the end of that book, the Alethi discover Uruthuru. This event expands the world, a hidden fortress built into the mountain, a safe haven, and a new place to explore. A huge castle, a symbol of politics that Sadeas plans to use to maneuver his way to the top. Adolin, however, has other ideas. And Ialai Sadeas? Well, devastated by the murder of her husband, she strives for knowledge and power of her own. She never serves a higher purpose and is killed in the opening pages of Book 4. We're shown the scheming and selfish city lord that was a major player in Book 1, also killed early in Book 4. And this isn't a bug in Sanderson's writing, it's a feature. Removing selfish characters gives Sanderson room to do his glorious character work and glorious action. Nomad reveals this exactly in The Sunlit Man.
You're going to have to learn to find something else to live for, Elegy. Something else? A reason, Nomad said. A purpose. Once you have that, you'll know when to fight and why. You'll fight for something.
Almost feels like a threat, doesn't it? See, when a character serves an ideal, it becomes easier to know what they should and should not do. It also lets the reader feel the weight of their responsibility. And when they don't serve an ideal, well, let's listen in as Taravangian recalls his duties to Odium in the first interlude of Rhythm of War.
At the god's orders, Taravangian had spent a year preparing Yaakoved to switch sides, promoting the people Odium wanted in place, moving troops into position. Now that he was done, Taravangian was useless. Worse, he was a potential weakness.
In this case, Sanderson is Odium to his characters. When Sanderson finds a potential weakness to his story, a selfish character, he cuts them away. When a character stops serving a higher purpose, he stops serving the story. Instead, Sanderson gives those selfish characters like Sadeas and Ialai a new purpose, one that fuels emotional growth in the living characters. Look at what Sadeas' death did for Adolin, or how Ialai's death fueled Shallan into reaching new heights of her power. Sanderson introduced us to the world of Roshar using politics to show us the machinations, history, and culture of the kingdom. And once the characters found themselves and the ideals they would serve, enemies included, he stripped away the politics and pitted the ideals against each other. When you compare this to the world in A Song of Ice and Fire, it almost feels like George R.R. Martin doesn't kill characters at all, even though we know that's not true. But Martin likes selfish characters. Just because a character is selfish doesn't mean they will die in a Martin story. In fact, they will probably live long enough to cause issues down the line. A Song of Ice and Fire readers know the amount of plot threads currently hanging in the series. Arya and the Faceless Men, the Grand Northern Conspiracy to rescue Rickon Stark, Lady Stoneheart and her band of men in the Riverlands, Karth, Danny being captured by the Dothraki, Stannis and his march on Winterfell, Ned's bones, who wrote the Pink Letter, what will happen with the glass candles in Old Town, Jaime what will come of Maggie the Frog's prophecy, Jojen Reed. Those selfish characters making the plot so complicated and intricate is a feature, not a bug. In fact, despite it being a hindrance to the series being finished, it's also what makes The Song of Ice and Fire one of the best unfinished fantasy series. Let's look at Robb Stark in the lead up to the Red Wedding. We knew Robb was just a 16-year-old boy making the mistakes a 16-year-old boy would make. We were so invested in how he could make his mistake right with the phrase that we failed to notice the plot to kill him happening right in front of us. And when Robb is killed, we see the impact his death has on the story. A character death isn't an excising of extraneous plot threads. It ripples for pages and pages and books and books. See, George R.R. Martin, with his intricacies and plate spinning, can make us feel a character's death. Sanderson, with his internal conflicts and stripped away politics, can make us feel a character's life. Odium confronts Dalinar at the end of Oathbringer.
Trembling, bleeding, agonized, Dalinar forced air into his lungs and spoke a single, ragged sentence. "You cannot have my pain."
We feel that. Kaladin stands on the precipice of the chasm.
And now here he was, at the end of it all, understanding so much more, but somehow feeling no wiser. He climbed to his feet on the lip of that chasm, and could feel his father's disappointment looming over him, like the thunderheads above. He put one foot out over the void.
We feel that. In the Wheel of Time, Rand sits atop Dragon Mount and realizes what life is about.
Rand raised his arms high, a conduit of power and energy, an incarnation of death and destruction. He would end it. End it all and let men rest, finally, from their suffering. Stop them from having to live over and over again. Why? Why had the Creator done this to them? Why? "Why do we live again?" Lews Therin asked suddenly. His voice was crisp and distinct. "Yes," Rand said, pleading. "Tell me. Why?" "Maybe," Lews Therin said, shockingly lucid, not a hint of madness to him. He spoke softly, reverently. "Why? Could it be? Maybe it's so that we can have a second chance." Rand froze. Why? Rand thought with wonder. Because each time we live, we get to love again.
These are Sanderson's strengths. He weaves magic, world building, and character together, giving readers these glorious moments. All of it combined in an epic finish that makes you stand up, pump your fist, and cry. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I don't plan to upload on a regular schedule. I only want to make quality videos, so if you want to know when a video comes out, subscribe. Conclusion. Sanderson has an affinity for ideals large and small. In the Stormlight Archive, his characters must swear to those ideals, admit to their imperfections, and latch on to oaths to push themselves onward. Instead of taking us down a grimdark pathway, we see Sanderson's route. We see him glorify in the life of his characters and not the death. And it was through the death of Sadeas that Sanderson forged his own path through fantasy. Whether you love it or hate it, whether you call it a magic system or fake science, whether you pump your fist or roll your eyes, Sanderson leans into what he does best to give readers big worlds, high stakes, and emotional stories that bring you inside. Thanks for watching.